everyone, my name is Sophie Scott and I'm a board member of I Have the Right To. To mark this year's Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we are releasing the second season of our series of interviews with survivors of sexual assault. The idea for these interviews came from a conversation that I had with Jessie a number of years ago, where she mentioned that she wished there had been a resource for survivors like herself to hear from other survivors about their path of navigating survivorship. And I said, well, wait a minute, why don't we create that ourselves? And so that's what this is. And we're really excited for you to hear from, to learn from all of the incredible survivors that we have spoken to for this second season. Leslie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Likewise, me too.
I'm wondering if you can walk us through what some of the warning signs are of relationship violence that could help someone recognize that they are in an unsafe situation.
Well, it's tricky because the beginning of a healthy relationship and the beginning of an abusive relationship often look very similar. The beginning of an abusive relationship, I'd say the biggest red flag is one that's very hard to ignore, which is that things seem too good to be true. It seems like it's a kind of like divine intervention, or the universe has brought you together and you're perfect together. And it's a fairy tale. And the truth is that love is not a fairy tale. Love is really pragmatic and requires a lot of hard work and trust and inner fortitude and mental health. And abusive relationships start out by kind of promising you that this other person is going to make you feel so wonderful all the time that you don't have to worry about any of those practical things. And you just have to be together and enjoy it. And I know from my own personal experience and from talking to thousands of survivors that it's extremely seductive and hard to ignore. And it isn't until you're really in deep in the relationship that the other dangerous red flags start showing up.
I mean, it must be really confusing to kind of have love and violence mesh together. How do you navigate that? And how do you get yourself to a point where you're able to recognize, whoa, what's going on here is violence. This is not okay.
Well, you know, if abusers hit us on the first date, we wouldn't even be having this conversation because there'd be no second date. The abuse doesn't happen at first, and abusers don't come with a warning sign on their forehead that says, I am going to abuse you. I'm going to take advantage of your trust and love. They wait until you're really in love with them and that you let down all your defenses. And then the abuse comes very gradually. And usually what happens is the threat of abuse first. And then they wait and see how you react. So for instance, in my case, my ex-husband started to be very possessive of me. And he started dictating clothing that I wore, how short my skirts were, and how much makeup I wore. But he didn't come out and say, I am doing this because I want to undermine your self-confidence and your independence. He came to me and he said, look, I'm really looking out for you. And I think, I know how ambitious you are at work. And I think you don't look totally professional with a skirt that short. So he would wrap all this up in him caring about me. And he would do that too with a threat of violence. He would say, I remember there was one night, he was very upset because a male friend of mine from college had called just to say hi and check in on me. And he got furious and he said, if I weren't such a gentleman, I might hit you right now. I might slap you for being so disrespectful to me. And he didn't hit me. He just said that he might. And so it was very, very confusing. And I didn't leave then, so he kind of knew that he had the green light the next time he got mad to actually hit me. But I'm even making it sound much more simple than it really is, Sophie, because this all takes place over the course of weeks, months, or sometimes years. And they slowly escalate it and make you, as their beloved, feel complicit in it. So another good example is that my ex would say that the reason that he got so angry with me is because he loved me so much. and that I made him feel so safe and so vulnerable, the way no woman had ever made him feel before. And that it was hard for him and triggering for him because he'd grown up with a lot of abuse at the hands of other women in his life. And he had a lot of betrayal. And so it made me feel sort of like flattered and powerful, and like my love was getting through to him and healing him. But when you step back, you see that it's all a con, and that he was just saying all that to justify the fact that he was starting to abuse me. And I cannot explain how confusing it is to be in love with somebody who is hurting you. It's, as you said, it's inexplicable that someone who you love and trust is undermining you, destroying your self-confidence, and actually like physically harming you. And I would say the last thing I would say that adds to the confusion is that from the very beginning, you are set up as the stronger one in the relationship. And I know this sounds contradictory probably to everything that everybody has heard about abuse, but it's what happens. So for instance, my abusive partner said that I was the prettiest girl he'd ever dated, the smartest, the most powerful, strongest, stablest. I was this, he worshiped me. And as part of that, I came to feel that I was his protector, and that I was the one who could explain him to the world to keep him safe, but also help all of you out there who thought he was abusive, who thought he had anger problems. I could explain to all of you that it was just that he had been abused as a child, and that if you really got to know him, you would see how kind and gentlemanly and wonderful he was, and that I was strong enough to take it. It's a very complex psychological trap disguised as love. And one of the things that is really amazing to me about all this is how, in some ways, this is very parallel to what happens to victims of sexual assault. We as a culture tend to really oversimplify crimes against women, sexual assault and domestic violence being two of them, and to blame the women for it, for not seeing it, for not being smart enough to get out of it. But what people who are committing crimes against women usually do is they make sure that the woman feels safe and in a trustworthy situation, so that then she is naturally going to blame herself instead of the perpetrator. Because again, if they hit us on the first date, or if a stranger attacked you, you'd have a lot easier time saying, I did nothing wrong. This was just a random act of violence. But when you are voluntarily with somebody and have feelings for somebody, you naturally, psychologically say, well, what did I do to cause this? And that makes it, the best cons are the ones where the victim thinks that he or she is responsible. And that's what sexual assault and domestic violence, one of the many things they have in common.
In your case, how did you begin to unpack that, where you could kind of make yourself realize, or bring yourself to realize, that what you were experiencing was not okay? And even though you were feeling also loved in so many ways, how did you get yourself to a point where you recognized overall, like, this is not okay?
It took a very, very long time. It took years. And that's really typical. I'm a very typical victim, and it took me a really long time to see what was happening. And even when I finally ended the relationship, I didn't fully want to end the relationship. I wasn't 100% sure that this was abuse. The things that helped me a lot to break through my own denial was that I had two very caring friends who confronted me about the abuse, and they did it in a really constructive and loving way. And that helped me just shatter my own denial. I also started doing a lot of research into abuse dynamics, and I started to see that this was a classic case of abuse. It doesn't feel like a classic case because it feels like it's happening to you and your beloved, but there were enough signs, and experts who I talked to about it described the relationship that I was in. And I think one of the things that helped me too is that one of the experts who I interviewed about male battering said that the best thing that any victim could do to help her abuser would be to leave. And that really spoke to me because I wanted to help him more than I even wanted to help myself. I was really classic in that I left many times. I mean, the beatings that I endured were really horrific. He used 3 loaded guns on me on a regular basis. He strangled me. He beat me. He humiliated me. He forbade me from seeing my friends and family. He did a lot to me. And so looking at this from the outside, you would think that it was really obvious to me and that I would have seen right away. But because it's such a complex psychological trap, I really couldn't see that. But I still left many times. And this is classic. It takes the average victim 7 attempts at leaving before he or she leaves. And that was me. And I would leave for very short periods of time, and then I would miss him or feel so trauma bonded to him that I had to go back. But each time I left, it was sort of like I got my foot further and further out the door. And the thing that really, 2 things happened that helped me the most. One is that the universe intervened to rebuild my self-esteem. We ended up going to Wharton Business School together, and my success at Wharton helped me to reconnect with the part of me that was ambitious and strong and didn't want an abusive life for myself. And then the other thing that happened at the same time was that his beatings got worse, which they always do. And it became, unfortunately, clear that he was going to kill me if I stayed. And as much as I loved him and as much as I felt sorry for him, I knew this was his problem, not mine. And I knew that, it sounds like a very obvious thing to say, but I didn't want to die. He wasn't worth that to me. And I also wasn't going to bring children into this world with him. And so we were married, and I wanted children and he wanted children, and I knew I couldn't have children with him. And those 2 people who had confronted me were my sounding board. They allowed me to break the silence about his abuse over and over again. And I told one of them about this, and she said, "No, you're right. You cannot have children with him because he'll hurt them too. And you can't do that." So I got a lot of support by breaking the silence. And it's the same with being a sexual assault survivor. The way that you recover is the first person you tell the truth to is yourself. You have to break through your own denial and admit what is happening to you or has happened. And then you have to tell other people who are supportive, who will believe you. And then you have to connect with other survivors too, because that's really your network that's going to help. And that's what happened to me when I started breaking the silence, when I decided that I really was going to end this relationship and people found out he had been abusing me. Other survivors came out of the woodwork to support me and to tell me that they had survived too and that I was going to be okay. And that was a lifeline back to normalcy for me. Those women and some men too.
When you were, when you had left for that final time, what did that feel like for you? Starting over your life in a lot of ways. That's an extremely, extremely daunting prospect, and in some ways could almost feel like you're being punished for wrongdoings that were, done to you that, are not not your fault in any way whatsoever, yet here you are having to reconstruct your life.
Yeah, I didn't feel that way. I call myself an abused victim and an abuse survivor because I like the word victim, believe it or not, because I was a victim. I was a victim of a crime. I was a victim of a felony. I was a victim of one of the worst things that you can do to another person. And it helped me to own that, to just say this did happen to me and it wasn't my fault. I fell in love with the wrong person. I trusted the wrong person. And so that helped me a lot psychologically. And what did it feel like? Well, at first it felt like my entire life had imploded. The police were involved. He had to leave my apartment. I had restraining orders against him. I was in the family court system. This was, here I am. I went to Harvard College and Wharton Business School, and I'm this career professional, and I'm dealing with the police and about a very personal matter, and everybody knows about it. It was really hard, and I needed so much support that I needed my friends and family and recruiters and everybody else to know that this was going on. I really needed that. I needed everybody to come out and help me. So it was horrible at first, and I I think that I cried and slept at least 12 hours of every day for a long time. And then I got angry that it happened to me. And that helped me too to rebuild my life. And I got angry at him for doing this to me, for taking so much advantage of my trust. And that served me very well. And I was really determined to rebuild my life. I was determined to get every job offer I could so that I could leave, graduate from Wharton, and be financially independent and get really far away from him. And that's exactly what I did. I had this core of kind of a feisty self-esteem that I always had, but he had tried really hard to destroy, and it was still there. And it served me well. And I got so much support from my community, from the police, from law enforcement, from family court. That doesn't always happen. Quite often, women who report crimes against them perpetrated by men don't get this kind of support that I got. But because I got it, it really helped me rebuild my life in a very straightforward way. It was very painful, but it was kind of clean and simple in its own way. And also, this is really important, he let me go. He stalked me for a short period of time. I mean, like a week. And then he got involved with somebody else, and I felt terrible for her, but it meant that I was free. And he contacted me once after we split up, and that was it. And that doesn't happen often. So I was very fortunate in lots of ways as well.
What resources are most critical for survivors, for victims, as you say, who are leaving for that final time?
So you need at least one person who you can trust, who believes you, who has no agenda, who doesn't want to be in a relationship with you, who doesn't want money from you, who doesn't want to take advantage of the fact that you're at a very vulnerable time. You need somebody who you can trust and break the silence with. And I had two people, but then I had a lot more because I called in all of my reinforcements, all of my friends. And they all believed me, and they all stood up for me, even though I'd been lying to them for years about what had been going on. They were very good. I think it's important to acknowledge the people who can't help you, because some people can't help you. And most of my family members could not help me. They loved me, but they didn't know anything about domestic violence. They didn't know anything that they could possibly do to help me. And they did all the wrong things. They tried to see his side of things. They tried to encourage me to not be so angry with him. But I had a couple of family members, including my mother, who really stood by me. And she was even angrier than I was. And that helped a lot. Nothing like having a really furious mother in your corner. She was fantastic. I had a good lawyer. I had a good therapist. And there are social media groups that are anonymous of survivors of violence against women that you can turn to. I think that other survivors are the people who are the most important because they really understand and they make you feel like you're not crazy. I had an advocate from the local women's domestic violence agency who went to family court with me. She believed in me. She knew more than I will ever know about abuse, and she helped me. Also, the two police who came that night, police, it's the number one thing that they do is go on domestic violence calls. And those police officers shared a lot of information with me that was very empowering. I tell you, because I was open about what had happened to me and I wasn't ashamed of it, I was able to access this huge reservoir of people who knew a thing or two about domestic violence and were willing to help me. And I'll give you one quick example. Everybody in my life thought that I should get my apartment locks changed so that the man who had tried to kill me couldn't come and actually kill me. And I was like, no, you're wrong. He'll never do that. But they convinced me. And so I called a locksmith, and it happened to be Christmas time. And he said, I can be there in 5 days. And I decided to tell him the truth. I just took a deep breath. I said, I just left a man who was physically abusing me. And he said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And, there were a lot of people like that. And not everybody, but there were people who didn't believe me, some really powerful people in my life who didn't believe me. And I was able to ignore those people and find the people who would support me. And I was my own advocate. And that's really important. And now this at the same time that I was so traumatized that in a normal conversation, I could not tell you why my marriage had ended. I might be able to say, my ex-husband physically abused me and I had to leave. But that took like 5 years off my life to say that sentence. It was so painful. And I couldn't afford the emotional energy to explain to people what had happened to me. So for a long time, for years, I really didn't talk about it. And it wasn't until I started writing my book, Crazy Love, that I started really digging into all of this and trying to understand it and explain it to myself, that I was able to talk about it. And so I want to say to any survivor out there, if you're having trouble talking about it, that's really normal. And I know so many people who can't talk about it. It's such a huge trauma to be betrayed in that way, to be physically violated by somebody who you trust. And I have lots of like really crazy stories about people I've worked with that they've done things that are so normal. Like there's one sexual assault survivor who I dealt with who, after the rape, she invited the rapist to move in with her, and she told her family that he was her boyfriend. And that lasted for a month before she was able to tell the truth to herself that he wasn't her boyfriend. He was a guy who she was on a date with who had assaulted her. And that's really normal. And most people in our culture, even therapists, don't understand how normal that degree of psychological denial is. That we think, you know what, if I just lie to myself, this won't have happened. I can pretend it didn't happen. And that never works. And that was part of my story too, is that I had to really come out and say, you know what, I chose this person. I chose this person and I stayed with him for years. And he did this to me and I allowed him to. And part of my healing is that I'm going to admit that to everybody, and I'm going to promise myself that I'm never going to let anybody do that again. And that's going to be part of my empowerment. And I was very fortunate that the marriage only lasted 4 years. I was 27 when it ended, which I was young. I was just starting out. I didn't have children. Like in so many ways, I had a really clean and fresh slate to rebuild my life. Not everybody gets that, but everybody gets something. And to look at your strengths and the fortunate things that have happened, as well as acknowledging how awful it is a really powerful foundation for building a good future going forward.
What are some misconceptions that you find people have about survivors of domestic violence?
Oh gosh, the things that they say, why didn't she just leave? Like, leaving is so easy. And it's such a victim blaming statement because it says it was my choice to leave whenever I could have left. They assume, even today with so much more awareness of what it means to be a female victim of domestic violence, they assume that you're insecure, that you have no self-esteem, that on some level you think you deserve it. And almost no one, even today, asks, why would anybody do that to you? Why would somebody who you love do that to you? Nobody points the finger at my ex when I'm talking about it. They just want to understand why I or anyone would stay. And that's important, okay? That's important to understand that. But it's not that hard to understand. We've all been in bad relationships. We've all been in relationships where we stayed longer than we wanted. What people really need to understand is why men do this. And it's mostly men who do this. Why would anybody hurt somebody who loves them? And why does so much of our society give them a pass and say, well, he really loved you. He was abused as a child. He had a complicated history. I had people say to me, well, you're a lot to handle. Like that's how I justified it, instead of saying you're strong and you're powerful and you're great. To say, I could go on and on and on about those misconceptions. The misconceptions all have to do with our society and the fact that it's much simpler and easier if just one by one we blame the victims, instead of blaming men writ large and saying, what is wrong with our world that we raise men who think it's okay to beat and even kill women who don't do what they want? It's incredible. Most of domestic violence homicides happen after we end the relationship. because the perpetrator is so angry that we finally stood up for ourselves. And a lot of those people get away with it. And sexual assault and domestic violence are the two most underreported crimes there are, because victims are so discouraged from coming forward. And then the criminal justice system in air quotes, is almost even worse than the crime itself. And that's on everybody in our society. That's not on victims. Sorry, I can talk forever about this because it's so wrong and it's so messed up. And I am so lucky that I got out, and that this is just one small thing that happened to me a long time ago. I'm so very fortunate. A lot of women die from this. A lot of women have children with abusers, and then they spend the rest of their lives being tortured by the abusers because the abuser knows there's no better way to get to you than through your kids. And they torture the kids too. And our society, at some level, we just let them.
Why is it so important for organizations like I Have the Right to be having conversations about safe, healthy relationships with students, and really laying that groundwork, that foundation from an early age?
So the beautiful thing about I Have the Right to, and the fact that it's so committed to reaching young people when we're all still just figuring out what love means, is that I Have the Right to is giving a lot of information to students. And it's encouraging students to turn to themselves and to turn inward, to ask the questions of, what is a healthy relationship? What kind of relationship do I want? And I Have the Right to is built on the most sacred thing ever, which is a victim coming forward and telling the truth about what happened to her. And there's tremendous power in that. And there is nobody of any age who can't respect that, who can't respect somebody saying, something terrible happened to me. My trust was violated. My body was violated. And at a very great level, my community didn't protect me. That's powerful, powerful stuff that everybody needs to know. And I think that nobody needs to know that more than kids who are just figuring out how to love and how to have relationships, even if they are relationships that last a couple of months or a couple of years. It doesn't matter. They're figuring this out. And one of my favorite audiences to speak to is kids in high school and the early years of college, because they know enough about relationships to know exactly what I'm talking about. But they want to avoid it. They want to avoid the trauma and the devastation that I've been through. And I Have the Right to gives people who are in that position a lot of tools and a lot of empowerment to have the conversation. And the hardest thing is to have this conversation with your own peers, but it's the most powerful thing. And anything that we do to get kids talking to each other, to get friends talking to each other, to get kids and families and kids and teachers and kids and coaches talking about how confusing love can be and how unhealthy dynamics sometimes masquerade as healthy dynamics at the beginning. It's priceless. And it also has a really great ripple effect, because once you get kids talking, then they know how to talk about it, and they talk and talk and talk, and then they spread the message. So anybody who has participated in I Have the Right to's workshops or sessions, or has read anything about the I Have the Right to story, is empowered to talk to their own peer group about this and just carry the message forward. And that is what I needed. I think I still might have been in an abusive relationship, but I think I would have gotten out a lot faster, because I would have recognized much more quickly what was going on, and that it was my future and my life that was at stake here. That this was very serious, and that it wasn't romance and fairy tales, and it wasn't me being a strong woman trying to help a man. It was abuse, and it was very dangerous to me and to everybody who I loved. Indeed, it was really dangerous to my ex-husband too, because he didn't want to be doing this. And he was committing a crime every time he hit me. And he is very lucky, too, that it didn't destroy his future, because it very easily could have. And there's no winner in all of this. The only solution is to talk about it the way I have the right to gets us talking. A question I get all the time is, how do you talk to kids about these really difficult and salacious and unseemly things that often involve physical violence and sexual violence? How do you talk to, and shouldn't we protect kids from this by not talking to them about it? And my answer to that is that abuse thrives only in silence, and that goes for kids as well. 16 to 24-year-olds are the key target group for violence and sexual assault predators. And if we don't start talking to kids at a really early age about this, it makes them more vulnerable, not less vulnerable. And anybody out there that thinks that not talking about the realities of sexual violence and physical violence in relationships, you're doing everybody a disservice. It is incredibly important to find a healthy and constructive way to talk to kids of any age, about the reality that sometimes, unfortunately, love and violence do go together, and that it's important that they have the information about it so they can protect themselves and their friends from being victims of relationship abuse and sexual violence, because it's everywhere. It's very common. It's in every community, every church, every school, every neighborhood, every family. And if we don't talk about it, all we're doing is perpetuating that violence and making it impossible for people to get help.
As you've been so brave in sharing your own story, have there ever been moments when you've worried about like retribution in some sort of way? How have you navigated that?
Yes, there are moments that I've been worried. When I was getting ready to publish Crazy Love, and it became clear that I was going to have to talk a lot about it to the media and in speaking engagements, I was really afraid that my ex-husband would come forward. And I had 3 little kids at the time, and I was afraid for them. And people talked to me about publishing it anonymously or with a pseudonym or something like that. And that felt really wrong to me because I was afraid that victims would think I was ashamed. And I just really dug deep and said, I'm going to take the risk and do this. And I vowed that, I had already protected myself from him once. And so I knew how to do it. I would hire a security guard or get an unlisted phone number. Like I would do things. And I went forward and did it. And what I have learned is that telling the truth about what has happened is your safety. It's your inoculation, because what was my ex-husband going to do? Was he going to come forward and say, hey, everybody, I'm the one who did this? I had disguised his identity in Crazy Love. I never, ever have unmasked him. He couldn't come forward. If he came forward, he'd be unmasking himself. And it is more complicated when you have children to protect, but I did have children to protect. And I once or twice I've had people feel sorry for me, and that's pissed me off. But I've never felt like I was in danger, or I felt like if I was in danger, I knew what to do. That I would immediately call the police. I would ask for security. I would ask for help. And I think that fear is meant to silence us, because fear is it is a tool of any kind of bully or abuser or dictator. And it's really important to me to fight against fear. And I've been doing this a long time, and I have never regretted coming forward. I never regret telling the truth about it. It has helped me. It intimidates the people who might want to go after me, including my ex. And, there are many other times where I've told the truth about other people who've done terrible things to me. And I am a big believer in telling the truth. And I think that you see it in Chessie's story. Chessie took away St. Paul's power over her by saying, okay, fine, I'll tell the truth. I'll unmask myself. And there's a lot of strength and power in that. And each victim has to find their way to do it. I mean, I assume that you're asking this for your own personal reasons or because of somebody you love. There's a way to do it that And you have to think a lot about it. Your brain is your biggest asset here. And I thought a lot about how I could do this in a way that would make it impossible for my abuser to come forward. And it's a lot what Chessie did as a teenager. She made it impossible for them to seek even further, to silence her even further. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Okay. No, 100%.
And I'm happy to brainstorm any time about that because, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome so very much.